The loan file landed on my desk at 9 a.m. on a Tuesday. And by 9:20, I knew the signature on page 11 was fake. I didn't need a lab. I didn't need a second opinion. The pen had hesitated at the top of the capital letter, the way a hand hesitates when it is copying instead of writing. And I flagged the file and sent it back and saved some stranger from a debt he never agreed to. I can do that because of what happened to me. 8 years ago, a landlord slid a rejection letter across a folding table, and I found out I was $61,000 in debt. Debt I had never touched. Credit cards I had never opened. A truck I had never driven. And every forged signature on every one of those accounts traced back to the two people who raised me. They took my work for free for 5 years. Then they took my name and spent that too. Today, a bank pays me to catch forgeries before they cost anyone a single dollar. I am the person who decides whether the paperwork is telling the truth. And the first forger I ever caught, the very first one, was my own father. My name is Aaron. I am 31 years old, and if you've ever been the one in your family who was counted on for everything and counted as nothing, this story is for you. Welcome back. Welcome back. This is where we tell stories about people who stopped explaining and started filing paperwork. Stay with me, because the ending of this one is written in my own handwriting to show you how I got from that folding table to this desk. I have to take you back once, just once. 9 years before that October morning, to a diner on the east side of Dayton, Ohio, where I was 14 years old and learning to write my own name. Keep that detail. The whole story turns on it. The diner was called Calloway's because we were the Calloways. And my father had owned it for as long as I'd been alive. 12 booths, a counter with 8 stools, a grill. My father worked himself 6 days a week. My mother ran the register. My brother Kyle, 3 years older than me, was supposed to bus tables. And sometimes he even did. I started working there the summer I turned 14, not officially. There was no schedule with my name on it. No time clock. No paperwork. There was just my father saying, "Aaron, we need you Saturday." And then, "Aaron, we need you after school." And then, by that winter, "We need you." Full stop. I took orders. I rolled silverware. I mopped the walk-in at close and did my homework standing up at the counter between the dinner rush and the regulars who nursed coffee until 9 p.m. And here is the part you need to see. Above the grill, on a shelf next to the ticket rail, sat an old coffee can. Red, faded label. The plastic lid, worn soft from handling. That can was the family bank. Tips went in the can. Loose bills went in the can. When a regular pressed $5 into my hand and said, "This is for you, sweetheart. You earned it," my father would watch me across the pass-through until I walked over and dropped it in the can. "For the family," he'd say, "it all goes to the same place." I want to be fair to the girl I was. I didn't feel robbed. I felt included. That is the thing nobody tells you about families like mine. The taking doesn't feel like taking. It feels like belonging. The can was where my money went to become our money. And our money was something I never saw again. One slow afternoon that first summer, I sat at the counter, practicing my signature on the back of a guest check. 14 years old, deciding who I was going to be. The way you do. Big looping E, the 2 L's in Calloway, leaning together like they were sharing a secret. I filled the whole back of that check, and my father picked it up off the counter, looked at it, and instead of throwing it away, he pinned it to the corkboard next to the register. So we never forget who is family, he said. That guest check hung by the register for years. Customers thought it was cute. I thought it was love. Remember it. That little piece of paper comes back, and when it does, it changes everything. By the next summer, I was working close to 30 hours a week. School nights, weekends, every holiday that other kids spent being kids. And I never received one paycheck. Not one. There was the can, and there was the phrase my father used whenever anyone got close to asking about money. The phrase that ran that building like a law of physics. Family doesn't keep score, he said it warmly. That is what you have to understand about my father. He wasn't a man who threw doors shut or raised his voice. Frank Calloway was calm, likable, generous, with strangers. He said, "Family doesn't keep score the way other men say good morning." And everyone who heard it nodded, because it sounds like wisdom. It took me 20 years to hear what it actually was. It was a rule with one direction. I wasn't allowed to keep score. He kept it constantly. 3 years into my time at that counter, 6 years before that October morning, I found out exactly how the scorekeeping worked. I was 17, filling out community college paperwork at the library, because our house didn't have a working printer. And the form asked about savings. I asked my mother that night about the account, the one they'd opened when I was little, the one every birthday check from my grandmother had gone into, the one my mother called Aaron's college money in front of relatives. Her hand on my shoulder, her voice full of church. My mother's face did something I'd seen before at the register, when a card got declined. A tiny pause. A recalculation. That money went where it was needed. She said, it took me 2 more questions to get the shape of it. The account was empty. It had been empty for over a year. $1,100 of birthday money, saved across a decade, gone in one withdrawal. And here is where I need you to meet my brother properly. Kyle was 20 then. And Kyle had a truck, a used pickup, dark blue, chrome step bars. The kind of truck a 20-year-old wants more than he wants a future. It had appeared in our driveway that spring, and nobody had explained it. Because in my family, things that benefited Kyle never required explanation. They arrived like weather. The down payment on that truck was $1,100. I did not scream. I want you to know that, because it matters for everything that comes later. I stood in the kitchen holding a community college form, and I asked my mother one question. Was it Dad's idea or yours? It was the family's decision. She said, I wasn't at the meeting. I said, you are 17, she said. You were at school. That was the whole fight. No yelling. No thrown doors. My mother, Donna Calloway, never fought with her voice. She fought with softness. She could make you feel cruel for noticing what she'd done. By the time she was finished explaining, the story was that Kyle needed reliable transportation to get to job sites, and I was young and had time. And family doesn't keep score. Honey, you'll understand when you are older. I am older now. I understand perfectly. That fall, there was a fundraiser at my mother's church, and I only mention it because of one small moment. I didn't understand for another 6 years. A woman from the congregation sat at a card table stamping. Documents for people, wills, permission slips, a title transfer. She had a little embossing tool, a notary stamp, the seal that is supposed to prove a real person really signed a real paper. In front of a witness, my mother leaned over to me and said, "Isn't that handy?" She does. Hours for free. I remember thinking, hours. What documents do we have? Hold that question. It is worth $85,000. And we'll get there. 4 years before that October morning, I left for community college. 19 years old, a duffel bag, a bus pass, and a scholarship that covered about half of everything. I'd earned it the same way I'd earned everything. Quietly. At a counter. In the hours nobody was watching. The night before I left, I worked a full shift. Of course, I did. And at close, wiping down the last booth. I made the only speech I ever made in that building. It wasn't much of one. I said, "I've been thinking. 5 years. I've worked here. Maybe there is something set aside. For books. For the deposit. On my dorm. My father didn't look up from the grill. He was scraping. He wasn't angry. He was almost gentle. Aaron, he said, family doesn't keep score. The minute you start keeping score, you are not family anymore. You are a customer. Then he lifted the coffee can down off the shelf, took out 2 $20 bills, and held them out to me like a gift. Like generosity. $40. For 5 years. Here is what I did the math on. Years later, when I finally let myself do it, 30 hours a week. Most weeks. For 5 years. At the minimum wage of those years. That is over $50,000 of work. $50,000 I handed into a coffee can. $4 and $8 and $12 at a time. That is not an allowance. I missed out on. That is a down payment. On a life. That is 4 years of the rent I would later be denied for. I took the $40. I am not proud of it, but I took it. Because I was 19, and it was that or nothing. And I got on the bus the next morning. If you've ever left home with less than you gave it, you know the exact weight of that bag. Now, this next part, I need you to watch closely. Because this is where it stops being about a coffee can. This is where it becomes a crime. And the worst part is, I was standing right there when it started, and I saw nothing. To enroll at the college, I needed my documents, birth certificate, social security card. My mother handled it. Of course, she handled it. She went into the filing cabinet in their bedroom, the one drawer that locked, and produced my paperwork like a magician. And 2 days after registration, she collected it all back. For safekeeping, she said, "You'll lose it. In a dorm. My social security number. The 9 digits that unlock an entire financial life." Went back into a locked drawer in my parents' bedroom, and I said thank you. 6 weeks after I started classes, someone opened a credit card in my name. I wouldn't learn that. For 4 more years. The application listed my parents' address. The card was mailed to my parents' address. The statements went to my parents' address. And I was 2 towns away, eating instant noodles, feeling guilty that I couldn't come back to cover Saturday shifts. By the time I turned 21, there were 3 cards. By 22, there were 4, plus something bigger we'll get to. all of it flowing to an address where my mother, and I want you to hear her own words, God as my witness, used to say, "Don't worry about the mail, sweetheart. I handle the mail." She did. She handled it beautifully. There was exactly one warning, one crack in the wall. About a year before that October morning, and I missed it. I was 22, home for my grandmother's birthday, and I stopped for gas, and the card I'd gotten through my own bank, my own little $500 limit, starter card that I'd been so careful with, got declined. Insufficient. Available credit. I'd used maybe $60 of it. I called the bank from the parking lot, and a bored voice told me my card was fine, but my credit profile had flagged something. And did I want to order a copy of my credit report? A credit report, if you've never had to think about one, is just the permanent record of your financial name. Every account, every debt, every late payment, written down by companies whose entire job is keeping score. I said I'd order it later. I was late for a birthday. There was cake, and my mother squeezed my shoulder, and my father told the story about me mopping the walk-in. At 14, like it was a fond memory we shared, and the coffee can sat on its shelf. And I drove back to my life and forgot. I've thought about that parking lot 100 times. If I'd ordered the report that day, I'd have found it all a year sooner. But I've stopped blaming that girl at the gas pump. She'd been trained her whole life not to look. That was the whole point of the training. Stay with me now. Because we've arrived at the morning, everything broke open. And I remember it in minutes. It was October. I was 23, one semester from finishing my associate degree, working 32 hours a week as a teller at a credit union to pay for the rest. I'd found an apartment. Nothing special. A one-bedroom over a dry cleaner. $640 a month, 10 minutes from campus. First place that would ever be mine. I'd saved the deposit in an envelope I kept inside a shoebox. Because some habits about where money hides run deep. The landlord ran applications on Tuesdays. He met me at a folding table in the empty unit, and he had a printout, and he didn't slide it across so much as let it go. Like it was heavy. "I can't rent to you," he said, and then, not unkindly, "You should see this. My credit score was 504, if that number means nothing to you. Here is the translation. It is the score of someone who has been drowning for years. It is not the score of a 23-year-old with one starter card and no late payments." He'd printed the summary page. 4 credit cards I'd never seen, opened over 5 years. $23,400 in balances. An auto loan, $31,800 outstanding. 61 days past due. Collections. Late fees stacked on late fees. Another $5,800 of pure penalty. $61,000. Total. In my name. I didn't do the arithmetic standing at that table. The page did it for me. In bold, at the bottom, $61,000 is more than I'd earned in my entire life at that point. It was every shift I'd ever worked. Taken twice. And one line of that printout was doing something to my stomach. Before my brain caught up, the auto loan. The originating dealer was a lot on Route 4 that I drove past every time I went home. The loan was 5 years old. The vehicle was a used pickup, dark blue, chrome, step bars. I had watched my brother wash that truck in our driveway, on Sunday afternoons, for 5 years. I had ridden in it. Kyle had hung an air freshener shaped like a pine tree from the mirror of a truck that was legally, catastrophically mine. I thanked the landlord. I don't know why. Training. Again. I walked down to my car, and I sat in the driver's seat, and I did not cry. I want that on the record. I sat there for maybe 10 minutes, very still, and what I felt wasn't even anger yet. It was recognition, like hearing the solution to a riddle. You've been living inside the locked drawer, the handled mail, the declined card, the truck that arrived like weather. Then I drove to the diner. It was 2:40 p.m. when I walked in. I know because the lunch rush was gone and the clock over the pass-through, the one that ran 6 minutes fast, so my father could yell about punctuality with a clear conscience. Said 2:46. My mother was at the register. My father was scraping the grill. 2 regulars at the counter. An old man in a booth with a crossword, the guest check with my 14-year-old signature still pinned to the corkboard. Sun faded to the color of weak tea, the coffee, can on its shelf. I put the landlord's printout on the counter, facing my mother, and I said one sentence. Tell me you didn't know. I have replayed what happened next more times than is healthy. And the detail that still gets me isn't anything they said. It is the speed. There was no shock. Nobody picked up the page and squinted at it and said, "What is this?" My mother looked at the printout for about 2 seconds, and then she looked up at me. And her face had already arrived at the next move, damage control. She skipped denial completely, and that is how I knew the whole thing. In one look, the way you know a storm from one gust. "Erin," she said. "Lower your voice." I hadn't raised it. My father came around the pass-through wiping his hands on his apron, and he read the page upside down without touching it. A thing I'd watched him do with health inspection reports my whole childhood, and he sighed. He sighed, like I was the problem, like I'd tracked something in. "We were going to take care of it," my mother said. "Every account. We never missed a payment on purpose. The diner's been slow. You know, it has been slow. And your brother needed a vehicle he could count on for work. And you weren't using your credit, honey. You were a student. It was just sitting there. It was just sitting there." I want to pause on that sentence, because if you've lived a version of this story, you've heard a version of that sentence. My unopened future was, to her, an unused asset, a parking space, an empty booth, something wasteful, not to fill. I asked how they got the cards. She said, it wasn't hard. She had everything in the drawer. I asked who signed the applications. And my mother, my church too. Times a week, mother said, with genuine irritation. They're online, Erin. Nobody signs anything anymore. She was wrong about that, by the way. Something did get signed. Something enormous. But standing in that diner, I didn't know about the $85,000 page yet. That discovery was still 4 years away, and it is coming. And when we get there, I want you to remember that in this moment, she thought the cards and the truck were the whole confession. My father spoke exactly twice. The first thing he said was, "We'll work it out. Family works it out." The second thing he said, I could have written for him. I mouthed along. Almost. He picked the printout up off the counter, folded it in half like a finished order, and said, "Erin, family doesn't keep score. Something happened in me then, and I've struggled to describe it in 8 years. So bear with me while I get it right. Nothing broke. That is the wrong word. It was more like a bill arriving. Like every ticket I'd ever clipped to that rail came printing back out of the machine at once. Itemized, 5 years of shifts, $1,100 of birthday money, $40 from a coffee can, $61,000 of debt, wearing my name like a costume, all on one long check, and at the bottom, in his voice, the words that had made the whole thing run. Family doesn't keep score. I looked at my father, and I said, I know, you've told me my whole life, and I finally believe you. You don't keep score. Because if you kept score, you'd owe me everything. Then I took my printout back out of his hand, folded it the same way he had, and I did the only dramatic thing I have ever done in my life. It is small. It won't sound like much, but everyone who has ever worked a family business will understand it. I took my apron off the hook by the walk-in, the one that had been my hook since I was 14, and I laid it on the counter and I straightened it, corners square, the way I'd been taught to leave a station. My mother said my name once, in the voice she used for company. My father said nothing at all. The old man in the booth had stopped doing his crossword, and I walked out of Callaway's at 2:55 p.m. And I have never taken another order in that building. You've stayed with me this far, so let me be straight with you about what happens next. Because the next part of this story is the part nobody makes videos about. It isn't a montage yet. It is 3 weeks of learning exactly how alone you are. Here is what I found out that October. Calling around on my breaks at the credit union. Whispering into my phone in the break room. When the person who steals your name is a stranger. Everyone knows the script, but when it is your parents, every phone call gets quiet. Because the fix, the real fix, runs through a police report. And the moment you say the words, the account was opened by my mother, the person on the other end says, so, would you like to proceed with a report against her? And the whole system waits to see if you'll flinch. Most people flinch. The banks know it. The parents who do this know it best of all. That is the actual product they're buying with a child's social security number, not money. Silence. They're betting the person they raised to put family first will put family first one more time and eat it. I flinched for 3 weeks. I am not ashamed to tell you that. I slept on a coworker's couch with my shoebox of deposit money I couldn't use, and I drafted a police report on my phone 4 times and deleted it 4 times. And one night I actually typed out a payment plan, me paying for the truck my brother drove, because owning $1,000 of their debt somehow felt lighter than 1 page of my testimony. If you have ever carried a debt that wasn't yours, in money or in anything else. Because putting it down felt like betrayal. I need you to hear the next part of this story, because the next person I met changed the entire direction of my life in 1 appointment. And she did it with 1 sentence. 3 weeks after that October morning, a coworker at the credit union wrote an address on a sticky note, a non-profit credit counseling office. She said, in a strip mall, between a tax preparer and a nail salon. Ask for Marisol. Marisol was maybe 55, reading glasses on a beaded chain, a desk with 2 chairs and a box of tissues, She never pushed toward me, which I appreciated more than I can say. She let me talk for 11 minutes without interrupting. I know it was 11 because she wrote the start time at the top of her legal pad, the way people do when they intend to take you seriously. When I finished, she didn't tell me it wasn't my fault. She didn't tell me it was. She looked at my landlord's printout, all $61,000 of it, and she took her glasses off, and she said the sentence I have carried for 8 years. They forged your name because it was worth something. They knew what it was worth before you did. I sat with that. I am going to let you sit with it, too. Everything I did afterward, everything, came out of that one sentence. Because she was right. You don't steal an identity that is worthless. You don't spend 5 years borrowing against a name you think is going nowhere. My parents had run a quiet, careful, multi-year operation on the credit of a teenager, and the operation only made sense if, somewhere underneath everything they never said to me, they believed my name was good. They'd bet $61,000 on it. Marisol laid out the path like a recipe, and I am going to give it to you the way she gave it to me. Because somebody watching this needs it. Step 1, pull all 3 credit reports, not the summary, the real ones. Every account, every address, every inquiry. Step 2, file an identity theft report with the Federal Trade Commission, which is just the government form that officially says these accounts are not mine, and starts a clock the banks have to respect. Step 3, the police report. Step 4, written disputes to every creditor. Certified mail, with copies of everything. And then she said, and there is no version of this where step 3 is optional. I asked her the question I'd been swallowing for 3 weeks. What happens to them? She said, that is not yours to manage anymore. You didn't put their names on those papers. They did. All you are doing is telling the truth about whose name is whose. If the truth has consequences, the consequences belong to the people who did the signing. She slid the federal form across the desk, and she handed me a pen. And I want to tell you about signing it, because it is the only time in this whole story I got sentimental. And I'd earned it. I hadn't really looked at my own signature in years. You don't. 2. It is a scribble you leave on card readers. But I signed that affidavit slowly, the big looping E, the 2 L's leaning together. The exact signature a 14-year-old had invented on the back of a guest check. And for the first time in my adult life, my name felt like it was mine to spend. If any part of this story is landing somewhere that has been quiet in you for a long time, do one thing for me. Put one word in the comments. Just the word. Mine. That is the whole message. You'll know what it means. And so will everyone who scrolls past it. And if you want to hear how a coffee can and a guest check bring down everything my parents built, make sure you were subscribed, because we are just getting to the part they never saw coming. Now, how? The rebuild. I am going to give you 4 years and 4 minutes. Because you already know, I survive. Survival isn't the story. The story is what I turned into. The disputes took 14 months. Start to finish. Certified letters, copies of the affidavit, copies of the police report I finally filed on a Tuesday in December, sitting in a plastic chair, giving a bored young officer my parents' names and address, while my hands stayed perfectly still in my lap. 14 months of form letters and hold music, one by one. The 4 credit cards came off my reports. The balances were charged off, which is bank language for the lender giving up on the money. and reassigned into the dispute process against the people whose hands had actually filled out the applications. The truck loan took the longest because the truck existed and somebody had to own it, and the somebody was never going to be me. While the letters ground along, I finished my degree. I kept the teller window, and I got good at it, and then I got noticed. Because here is the strange gift buried in what my parents did to me. I had become, out of pure necessity, a person who reads documents the way other people read faces. I knew what an application was supposed to look like because I'd spent 14 months staring at 4 of them that were wrong. The credit union moved me off the window and into the back office. Loan processing first, then underwriting, which is just the job of deciding whether the bank believes a file, then senior review. The desk where the questionable files land. I moved into the apartment over the dry cleaner. By the way, the landlord ran me again 18 months after that folding table, and the score had climbed out of the 500s, and he handed me the keys, and the first thing I bought for that kitchen was coffee, the cheap kind, in a can. I kept the can when it was empty, and I put it on the counter, and I dropped my spare change in it. And if you think I didn't stand there some nights looking at it, you haven't been listening. Same object. Different owner. That is the whole war, right there. In one piece of tin, 4 years after that October morning. The war was supposed to be over. Score, rebuilt. Name, clean. Career, moving. I had decided, in a managed, adult, therapized kind of way. To be done, to let the distance do the work, the way distance does. Then, on an ordinary Thursday, an envelope arrived from Hartwell Community Bank. And I learned that the cards and the truck had never been the whole story. They'd been the small story. Stay with me. This is where it changes. The envelope was thick, and the return address was a bank I had never held an account with, and my whole body knew before my hands did. Inside was a letter, 3 paragraphs of careful legal weather, and a copy of a document. The letter said that Hartwell Community Bank had extended a commercial loan to Calloway's Diner, that the loan was in serious default, and that the bank was contacting me in my capacity as personal guarantor. Guarantor. Let me translate that word, because it is the most expensive word in this story. A personal guarantee is a page that says, if the business cannot pay, I will. Personally. My savings, my wages, my future. Standing behind the diner's debt, like a cosigner for a building, the amount of the loan was $85,000. The guarantee had been signed 18 months before that, October morning, while I was 2 towns away, eating instant noodles, feeling guilty about missing Saturday shifts. My parents had walked into a bank and borrowed $85,000 against the diner, and the bank had asked for security. And they had handed the bank me. I cleared my kitchen table. This is what I do. This is what the last 4 years had built me into. And I want you to watch me do it. Because this table is where my parents lost. Page 1. The guarantee itself. Commercial guarantee, Hartwell Community Bank. My full legal name typed under the signature line, and on the line, a signature, my signature. Accept. Tau SB. I had, by then, reviewed thousands of signatures, professionally. I knew this one, the way you know. An old photograph of yourself. The big, looping, E, the 2 L's leaning together, like they were sharing a secret. It was beautiful. It was exact. And it was 14 years old. It was stroke for stroke. The signature from the back of a guest check pinned to a corkboard next to a register. The signature of a child. Sun faded to the color of weak tea. Hanging in the one place my father stood every single day. He hadn't imitated my handwriting. He'd copied the sample he kept on display. So, we never forget who is family. He'd turned my love letter to my own future into a template. My adult signature had drifted, the way everyone's does, sharper E now. The L's stand straighter. 8 years of card readers and affidavits and loan documents, all on file, all witnessed, all provably mine, and not one of them matched the museum piece on that guarantee. My father had forged me so faithfully that he'd forged the wrong year of me. That guest check was about to become the single most important piece of evidence in this entire story. And he was the one who'd preserved it. Page 2 of the packet. The notary block. Because a guarantee of that size doesn't just get signed. It gets witnessed, stamped, with that little embossed seal that swears a real person really appeared and really signed. The stamp on my forged signature belonged to a name I didn't recognize. And then, under it, in the commission details, a church I recognized instantly. My mother's church. The card table at the fundraiser. Isn't that handy? She does ours, for free. She had notarized a signature I never made, in a room I was never in, swearing under her official seal that she'd watched me sign. And then, 1 page further in the same folder, the detail that turned a favor into a felony-shaped problem. Notary commissions expire. Hers had lapsed 2 full years before the date on that stamp. The seal wasn't just dishonest. It was dead. A dead stamp on a forged name, securing 85,000 borrowed dollars. And the last page, a copy of the original loan application file, and there, listed among supporting documents, the truck loan. My truck loan, the one I'd spent 14 months disputing, listed as evidence of the family's borrowing history, and on the application, an income figure next to my name. An income I have never in my life earned, written in the small, square, all capitals handwriting I'd been reading on order tickets. Since I was 14 years old, my father hadn't even disguised it. I sat at my kitchen table with those pages for a long time. I did not cry, not then. What I felt was the thing I felt in the parking lot of the diner, recognition, but colder and wider, because now I could see the architecture. The cards had been the pilot program. The truck had been the proof of concept, and when the diner started sinking, they had gone to the deepest well they had. And the deepest well they had was me. It had always been me. The unpaid shifts, the emptied account, the borrowed name. I wasn't the family's daughter. I was the family's collateral. Here is what I did next, and I want to be precise. Because precision is the whole point of me, I did not call my parents. I did not call a talk show. I did not do one single thing outside the lines. Because I had learned the lesson my parents never learned. The system they used against me keeps perfect records, and it does not care whose feelings get hurt. And it was, for once, entirely on my side. I photographed every page. I wrote a response to Hartwell Community Bank, formally disputing the guarantee as a forgery, and I attached my federal identity theft report, my police report. And this is the part I'll be proud of on my deathbed. 8 years of my authentic signature. Lease. Affidavit. Employment. Paperwork. Every provably real Aaron Calloway, laid side by side against the impossible 14-year-old on their guarantee. Then I requested a meeting with the bank's fraud review team, and I sat across a conference table from a document examiner, a person whose job title I now share the hallway with. And I watched her line the signatures up, and I watched her get to the guest check era of my handwriting, and I watched her eyebrows. Where would someone even get a sample this old? She asked. It is pinned to a corkboard, I said, next to a register. In a diner, on the east side of Dayton. 6 weeks later, the letter came. And I am going to read you the plain language version of what it said, because this letter is the hinge of my entire life. Hartwell Community Bank had completed its review. The bank concluded that the guarantee signature was not made by me. My name was formally released from the obligation. The $85,000 did not vanish. Debt never vanishes. It went looking for the people who actually signed, and this time it knew exactly where they lived, because their real signatures were all over the rest of the file. The letter also stated, in one flat sentence, that the matter of the notarization had been referred to the state office that licenses notaries, and that the bank reserved all rights regarding the application itself. Reserved all rights. 3 quiet words that mean, this is now a fraud file. I read that letter standing at my kitchen counter, next to a coffee can full of spare change. Then, I took it out to my car, because I didn't want to do what was coming inside my clean apartment, and I sat in the driver's seat, the same position I'd been in outside the diner 4.5 years earlier. And that is where it finally happened. Once, alone. 8 years of it, in a parked car, with the letter face down on the passenger seat. So it wouldn't watch. It lasted about 10 minutes. Then I wiped my face, and I drove to work, and I reviewed 11 files that afternoon. And I flagged one. If you know exactly why the car and not the kitchen, you are who I make these videos for. Now, the reckoning, 5 years after that October morning, and I want to set your expectations honestly, because this is not the scene where I scream in a parking lot. My parents had spent my whole life betting that I would either swallow things quietly or explode uselessly, because both of those are free. What they never priced in was a third option. Calm, documented, and expensive. I called the diner on a Monday and asked my mother for 30 minutes on Thursday before opening. She said, in her company voice, of course, "Honey, we've been wanting to talk." I am sure they had. By then, Hartwell had stopped being polite with them. The bank had recalled the diner's loan, which means it demanded the whole balance at once. The way banks are allowed to do when they discover a security document was forged. Letters were arriving at their house now, real ones. Certified. My mother knew exactly how that felt, except these ones were actually addressed to her. Thursday, 7:30 a.m. The diner smelled the same. Coffee and griddle grease. And bleach from the night mop. The clock over the pass through still ran 6 minutes fast. The guest check was gone from the corkboard. I noticed that within the first 10 seconds, and I noticed the clean rectangle of unfaded cork where it had hung for 15 years. And I understood somebody had realized, too late, what they'd left on display. Taking it down didn't matter. The bank had certified copies. But That clean rectangle told me they knew there would be no shock this morning. From anyone. My father stood behind the counter, arms folded. My mother sat at the register on her stool. Kyle was there too, in the doorway to the back, which surprised me for a second, and then didn't. His truck was gone by then, repossessed in the spring, once the loan was finally, legally, reassigned to the people who'd actually taken it out. He'd been driving my name for 9 years. And my name had been towed out of his driveway. I didn't sit. I put a folder on the counter, and I said, I am going to tell you 5 things. I am not going to argue about any of them, because none of them are opinions. 1. Hartwell Community Bank has formally concluded that the signature on your guarantee is a forgery. I am released. You are not. The $85,000 is yours, and it is due now. All of it, because forging a guarantee gives the bank the right to call the whole loan. 2. The notary seal on that page was expired when it was used. The state office that licenses notaries has your friend's file open. She swore. She watched me sign. She is going to have to explain, under her own real signature, why she swore that. 3. The truck loan and the credit cards were removed from my name 3 years ago, through a federal identity theft report and a police report. Both reports name both of you. They've been on file this whole time. I never sent the police after you. I also never lied to a single person about what you did. Everything that is happening to you now is happening because your own paperwork tells the truth about you. And I stopped standing in front of it. 4. I've done the arithmetic you never let me do. 5 years of unpaid work. $50,000 at the wages of the time, the birthday money, the $40 from the can, the $61,000 you spent in my name, and the $85,000 you signed against it. I am not asking you for any of it. I want you to understand why. It is not forgiveness. It is that there is nothing in this building worth what it costs to keep touching it. 5. Woof. My father raised one hand a little, the way he'd quiet a rush, and said my name, Aaron. And I looked at him, and he said, so that is it. You are going to sit there, keeping score. And I want to thank him for that, honestly, because I'd wondered if I'd get to say the thing. And he walked me right to it. No, I said, you were right, all along, Dad. Family doesn't keep score. So, I stopped doing it myself. And I handed it to the people whose entire job is keeping score. The bank keeps score. The state keeps score. The credit bureaus keep score. Every one of them has been keeping score on you for years, in your own handwriting. All I ever did was hand back the pen. My mother started to cry on command. The register sighed tears I'd watched my whole childhood. And she said, we're your parents. And I picked up my folder and what I felt. And I am being as honest with you as I know how to be, was not triumph. It was the same thing I'd felt straightening my apron on this counter 5 years earlier. A station. Left clean. We were, I said, and I walked out of Callaway's for the second and last time. At 7:52 am. Into a cold morning that felt like the inside of my own name. What happened after is a matter of public record. And I'll give it to you flat. The way I like my facts. The diner could not pay $85,000 on demand. Nobody thought it could. Callaway's was sold that winter, after 26 years, to a restaurant group that kept the booths and changed the name. My father works a grill again, in someone else's kitchen, on someone else's schedule, punching someone else's clock. There is a time clock now. I think about that more than I should. The judgment for the guarantee followed them personally, because that is exactly what a personal guarantee does. It just finally chased the people who'd actually signed one. The notary lost her commission. She surrendered it in writing rather than sit through the hearing, which tells you everything about what the hearing would have shown. And then came the part Marisol never warned me about, though I suspect she knew: the escalation. Because people like my parents do not go quietly, they go loudly. In your direction, 14 voicemails from my mother in the first month. I counted. Of course I counted. Counting is who I am now. Voicemails that traveled the entire arc, from "Honey, we can fix this," to "How could you do this to your father?" to a long one, left at 1 a.m., that used the word ungrateful 4 times and the word sorry 0. My father sent exactly one text. It said, "I hope it was worth it." I didn't answer either of them, but I want you to know the reply I drafted and deleted, because you've earned it. It was one line. You already know it was. You did the math before you signed. My mother came to the credit union once, stood in my lobby in her church coat, and asked the teller, my old window, if her daughter was available. I watched from the back office as the branch manager, a woman who knew my whole file in both senses, walked out and told her, politely, in front of everyone, that she'd need to leave. My mother looked past her, scanning for me, and for 1 second we saw each other through the glass. She mouthed something. I picked up the next file on my desk and read page 1. That is the whole scene. That is what 8 years buys you. Not a speech. Through the glass. A next file. A Christmas letter still comes, every year. Round, looping handwriting I'd know anywhere. The same loops that filled out 4 credit card applications. I don't open them. And I don't throw them away. They go in a shoebox. Because some habits about where paper hides run deep. And because a woman I trust once taught me, you keep every document. You never know which page turns out to matter. So where does a story like this end? Not with a reunion. I want to say that clearly. For everyone waiting for the scene, where somebody apologizes, and I come home for Thanksgiving, that scene isn't coming. There was no apology in 14 voicemails. No apology in 5 Christmases of letters. And I've stopped listening for one, which is different from being bitter. And if you've done it, you know the difference in your body. Bitterness is carrying the debt. This is filing it correctly. But I didn't walk out of that family with nothing. I salvaged one thread, and it is the one I'd have chosen. My grandmother. The birthday check grandmother, whose $1,100 started this whole ledger. She is 88 now, and it turns out she'd been watching the entire time. The way old women watch, silently and completely. When everything surfaced, she didn't defend anyone, and she didn't perform outrage. She sent me a card to the correct address, which no one else in that family had ever bothered to know. And inside she'd written one sentence: I always liked your signature best. She'd seen the guest check on the corkboard. For 15 years, too. She knew exactly what she was saying. We have lunch on the first Sunday of every month, and she has never once asked me to soften anything. And that, it turns out, is what family actually costs. Nothing. or Tem de Sand. It costs nothing. That is how you know. It is real. Kyle called me once, 2 years ago. Sober-voiced. No truck. No script. He didn't apologize either. Not really. But he said something better than an apology. He said, "I used to think you left us. I've been going through my own paperwork lately. You didn't leave. You were withdrawn. Like funds." I told him that was the most honest sentence anyone in our family had ever said to me. And I meant it. And we talk a few times a year now. Carefully. Like two people who survived the same bank. And me. 3 months ago, at 9 a.m. on a Tuesday, I sat at a closing table, and a title agent slid a stack of papers across polished wood, a small one, brick, with a kitchen window facing east. My loan file was reviewed by an underwriter I'll never meet, someone whose whole job was deciding whether my paperwork told the truth. And I want you to appreciate what it means to me that it sailed through. Every account mine. Every payment mine. Every dollar of the down payment earned in my own name at my own desk. And not one page of my life requiring a single explanation. Sign here, the agent said. And here, and initial here. And I did. Slowly. The E. Sharper now. The 2 L's standing straight. Not the 14-year-old's signature. Hers. Got taken. This one is the woman that girl invoiced her way into becoming, and it has never once, not one time, been signed anywhere I wasn't standing. The pen I used came from my kitchen counter, from the can. Because, yes, the coffee can made the move. It sits by my new window, the cheap red one from the apartment over the dry cleaner. And it doesn't hold the family's money, and it doesn't hold my spare change anymore. It holds pens. Good ones. The tools of the signature. The can that taught me my work disappears into other people's hands, now holds the exact instrument they tried to steal. And every morning, it is the first thing the sun hits. My father kept a child's signature pinned up for 15 years, and called it never forgetting who is family. He was more right than he knew. I never forgot either. I just finally read the fine print. Family doesn't keep score. He built my whole childhood on that sentence. And here at the end, I'll tell you the version of it I actually live by. The version I'd say to the girl practicing her name on the back of a guest check, if I could reach her. Family doesn't keep score, sweetheart. But the world does. Every signature is scorekeeping. Every ledger, every report, every stamped and dated page. So make sure, whatever else you do, that the hand keeping your score is your own. That was Aaron's story. 5 years of unpaid shifts, 61,000 stolen dollars, 1 guest check, and a signature that came home. If you know someone who is still standing in front of somebody else's paperwork, send them this. If it was you, the comment section is yours. 1 word is enough. Thank you for staying with me all the way to the last page. Subscribe if you want the next story. And until then, read everything before you sign. And never sign anything you didn't read.